Hi friends, welcome back. I'm so excited for today's video because we are talking about all the books that I read in January and February and what I thought about them. Now, I did start off the year strong with Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and if you guys remember, this was a book that I started maybe in November of 2024, but I just never got the opportunity to finish because we had so many other books that we were in the middle of and we just ran out of time basically. So I picked it up again in the beginning of this year and I'm so glad that I did. It was an easy 6-star and it's so nice to start the year off with a 6-star read because it just sets the tone for the rest of the year. And I love it because it starts off seemingly normal. It's about this really brilliant physicist who is a family man, loves his family, loves his life. He's not necessarily well renowned, but he's not unhappy either. His life is pretty good. But one day he wakes up and his world is no longer his own and he's in this strange new reality and he has to make impossible choices to find his way back to his family and back to his old life. Now, the writing in this is fast-paced and super engaging and it has your attention from the first sentence. Like literally I was hooked from the first page. Now the characters are pretty decently developed. It's enough to make you invested in the story. I did feel like there were some loose ends with some of the side characters, but it didn't necessarily take away from the story, from the overall plot, so I thought it was fine. But overall, again, I rated this a 6-star just because following the main character and the different impossible tasks he had to overcome constantly just made the story so incredible. And it was not like anything I've ever read before. And again, this is a sci-fi book, and usually with sci-fis you feel like you have to go through these hypothetical scientific situations, and so you think going into a book like that it's going to be very logical. But I love this book because it came to like a really pivotal point where it was all about logic but also emotion. This book made you think and feel in equal measure, and I thought that that was really brilliant because though I love sci-fi, I can't say that every book is necessarily achieving that goal, and Blake definitely did that with this book. And though the book discusses very complex scientific theories, he was able to explain it very well while keeping the intelligence level high, which I loved because he did a great job of balancing his own creativity to find these answers to questions that we don't even have answers to now, but also make it kind of realistic. So that balance was really cool. And then at the end, I felt like it was a great conclusion, even though with books like that, to tie up all the seams, sometimes it's kind of hard to do that because usually those become predictable. But he did it in a very unique way where I genuinely didn't see the ending coming. It was very shocking and it was very, very memorable and I really enjoyed it. And one thing that I really loved too was the fact that there were so many quotable things in this book, so many thought-provoking concepts and sentences and ideas that really got me. And there was one that really stuck out to me that I want to read to you. And it says, "No one tells you it's all about to change, to be taken away. There's no proximity alert, no indication that you're standing on the precipice. And maybe that's what makes tragedy so tragic. Not just what happens, but how it happens. A sucker punch that comes at you out of nowhere when you're least expecting it. No time to flinch or brace." And this is just a quote from a section in the book where he was really going through it. He was in the trenches, and I just loved how he wrote this section just because it made me feel a visceral reaction to what he was going through. And I just felt like I was right there with him in the story, and I love books that can do that, and this book did that perfectly. So again, that was a 6-star. Then after I read Dark Matter, I did read the first book in the Percy Jackson series. Now, if y'all remember, this is a book series that I read when I was a kid and I absolutely fell in love with it. I ate it up. I read the entire series. No, that's not true. I read like the first 3 books and I never got to finish it, but then I wanted to continue it this year because last year we read the Harry Potter series and I truly had such a life-changing experience with that. So I wanted to make it a tradition where we read like a really important, very big, very popular series. And I thought that the Percy Jackson series would be perfect for this year. However, even though I enjoyed it and I still gave it a 4-star, I felt like it was too elementary for me in my stage in life. I am 27 years old and this was a book series that I began reading when I was 12, so a lot has changed. And though it still has a very close place to me in my heart, I just felt like I've outgrown this type of story. And not even necessarily this type of story, but maybe just the writing. Like I felt like some of the jokes were rudimentary. I felt like it was written for a different audience. Like it genuinely felt like I was sitting in on a middle school class. Like I know I'm not supposed to be here. Like this isn't for me. This class is not for me. I get the importance of it and I think it's really important for them, but I am not supposed to be here. And unfortunately, that's how I felt when we first read the first book and made that reading vlog. Though I had a great time because it reminded me and had all of my memories of when I read this as a child, I just didn't feel like it was something that I could read now, which was unfortunate. But if you're not familiar with the story, it does follow this young boy. His name is Percy. Percy, and he lives in New York City. And life has always been pretty weird for him. He's never felt like he's fit in anywhere. He doesn't feel like anyone understands him, and then he learns why. He learns that his father is a god, and so he gets sent off to a camp that's supposed to help him develop his powers or be around other kids that understand what he's going through. But during his time there, he has to basically save the world in 10 days. Him and his friends. He doesn't have much time, and you follow that story. It's a great adventure if you're a young kid, and I do love this story. It's just, again, I don't feel like this was the best time for me to read it again. I will say though, I really did enjoy going back to the story just because it was so cool to see Greek mythology in a modern light. Like, they were talking about gods as if they were modern people now, and that's so cool. Like, that's not something I've ever seen before, and it reminded me of the creativity in this book, how cool it was, how different it is from anything else, and it's a wonderful story truly if you're a young kid. Again, I just don't feel like I'm in the age group anymore. After finishing The Lightning Thief, I made a complete 180 and then read 1984 by George Orwell. Whew, was that a ride? Oh my goodness. This was a book I think I started in 2023, but I read the physical book. To be honest, it was a little bit boring for me, so I switched over to the audiobook this year, and I'm really glad that I did because the audiobook just made everything make sense in my opinion, and I felt like the voice acting and the storytelling really helped me grasp the importance of the story in general. And it's a very cautionary tale basically, and it was very jarring only because it paralleled and matches our society too closely. And yes, this is a book written at its extremes, but I think that books like this are so important, so powerful, because it shows you if we continue on this path, this is where we're going eventually. It may not affect you and your personal life, but it could affect your kids. You know what I'm saying? And I think that it's a nice wake-up call for us when we read books like this, because it reminds us that the society that we're living in is not okay, and there are certain things that we need to change to avoid worst case scenarios like this. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, even with using the audiobook to get through this book, there were still so many complex themes and ideas that I wanted to mull over that I had to continuously stop and start reading this book just because I wanted to make sure I understood the entire picture when I got through the book. And though I continued doing that, I felt like there were some things that I still didn't catch, and maybe I should reread it again in a few more years. But overall, I still thought it was a wonderful read just because it was an informative read. This book talks about so many important things: brainwashing, how we use society to control the masses, how knowledge is power, and the people in power know this, and so they try to revoke that by doing little things like preventing you from reading specific books, things like that. And that is terrifying. That is happening today. And yes, again, it is not to the extreme where Winston, the main character in this book, lives, where they can't even have books, where they can't even write things down. But again, it starts with these little steps. It starts with saying you can't read this book. It starts with saying that you have to listen to these rules even though they don't necessarily make sense. It starts with things like that, and it starts with the group think, the hatred and the masses and violence just for violence. It starts with these things, and I think that is why this book is so chilling, because though we're not necessarily there, we're tiptoeing the line of going down that direction, and I think that's just terrifying. So again, knowledge is power. Yes, it's fun to read fun and light and fluffy books, but it's also imperative that we read really important books like 1984. And after reading 1984, I really do want to get to Fahrenheit 451, which is another classic dystopian, and I hope to get to that by April, and also read The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. But again, I'm getting off on a tangent here. I just wanted to say this was a tough read, but a necessary read, and I'm really glad that I did read it, and I definitely will be reading it again, maybe in the next 5 years, just to see if I learn even more. And before I get off of this book, I think the one thing that I really enjoyed about it is the fact that it put the things and the concepts and the ideas that I had in my mind into words that I could understand. It's like you're living through a life where you know that this isn't right, these injustices isn't right, it's not right what we're doing, but I don't know why it's incorrect. And in this book, though it was very complex and some parts were boring, when he got to the meat of the issue, the psychology of groupthink and power, that's when he really explained these situations, these things that I've always felt a way about, but I just could never articulate myself in. And if you also feel that way, I think this would be a great book for you, just because it really makes you more informed in those type of situations. So then when you do have these more important conversations with people, you can better articulate yourself. And that's what I really appreciated from reading this book. And that's mainly what I got from reading this book. And then after reading 1984, I kind of just went down a rabbit hole of just finding intellectually stimulating books. So then I followed that up with reading The Mountain Is You again. Again, y'all know this is a book that I listen to every single morning. So I'm only going to count saying that I've read this book once this year, because I feel like it's cheating if I just keep saying I read it 1,000 times, because I'm just listening to it every day. But this time I read the physical copy, and I'm really glad that I did, because I was able to highlight things that I felt like I really needed to work on, highlight things that I really need to go back to and remember in my daily life to adhere to or change. And I think that that was nice. And instead of just listening to it, I was able to really pay attention to the words. And I think sometimes you kind of just drown it out when you're listening to the same book over and over again, but reading the physical book every night was really helpful for me. And if you're not familiar with what The Mountain Is You is about, this is a book by Brianna Wiest that really focuses on self-sabotage and what it is and how to get through it. And I am not going to lie to you, I am the queen of self-sabotage. It is really awful. It is a coping mechanism that I just have kept my entire life, and it makes me sick. Like, I'm tired of it myself, and I know that it affects the people around me and the people that I love around me. So I definitely want that to be something that I fix this year. So that is why I'm committed to listening to this book every single day. But I am telling you, if there's anything in your life that you feel like you're lacking on, or anything in your life where you feel like you're your biggest enemy, you're your biggest op, this is the book for you, because she does not hold anything back. She gives you plenty of examples to make sure you feel like she's talking to you. If it's not this one thing, it's this other thing. If it's not that thing, it's this thing. She will make sure you feel seen, for better or for worse. And honestly, because my coping mechanisms run so deep, she was talking to me personally a lot of the book. Like 90% of the book, I felt like she was talking directly to me, which is a good and bad thing, because it felt like, okay, now I have the answers and the tools to fix these issues. But also on the other hand, like, dang, Brianna, why are you so loud? You know what I mean? But overall, in all seriousness, I do believe that this is one of the better self-help books, just because not only does she point out an issue or a problem in your life, but she gives you real life, real world solutions for them. Not just like, oh, you do this is terrible, stop doing that. She's like, no, let's think about the psychology of this. Why do you do this? Why do you do this? And why is it connected to this? And how can you undo this? And yes, it's a bad coping mechanism and a bad habit that you've had for years. So naturally, this is why it's so hard to get rid of it. And she helps you walk through the psychology of it, not only from an emotional state, but also from a logical one. So you feel like you have an answer. You feel like you have real tangible ways to change your life. A lot of the times I feel like, me personally, when you read these self-help books, they point out an issue and they say like, oh, this sucks. And then they either do one thing where it's like, they give you a very extreme example of how to fix it, and you're supposed to do this one thing or no way at all. And if you don't follow their rules and their way to a T, it's your fault that it didn't work. Or number two, they just say, this is a really big issue you have, change it, and they don't give you a solution to it. But in this book, it's perfect, because not only does she give you a solution to it, but she tells you the why behind it and the how of getting rid of it. And I love that, because that's very hard to do. I feel like in some self-help books, because a lot of times people just be talking just to talk, I feel like, and they don't really know how to fix it, but they say like, oh, I made a self-help book and this is going to help you, and it doesn't really help you. But this one is definitely one that I would recommend to anybody. Now, after that, I did follow it up with The Psychology of Money, and this was helpful, but I did expect more from it. Even though I didn't necessarily know what I was going to get out of it, I didn't think I was going to get what I got. With The Psychology of Money, it was helpful, and I am glad that I read the book, but I felt like it was just explaining human nature and psychology in that way, and how it dictates how we spend our money, which I guess I should have realized that's what the book was going to be about, with the title being The Psychology of Money. It's just, I thought that they were going to give me money advice. But honestly, you know what? In hindsight, saying this out loud, speaking this now, it was a good book. It was a good book. I did give it 3 stars, but now I think it's like a 3.5. Only because it does explain to you how we spend money on an emotional level. It's not logistical. Even when some things are logistical, when we put our feet to the fire, when the stock market goes up or the stock market goes down, that's when we make our decisions about our money. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that I do spend a lot of my money emotionally, and it made me be a little more cautious and conscientious. Is that how you say that word? Conscientious. Conscientious. It made me think about how I'm spending my money, okay? And that was really important because I think the first step is being in the moment when you're spending money instead of just doing it. And a lot of the times now, everything's at the touch of your fingers. Everything's Apple Pay, or it's paying online, or the sites already have your credit card information. You just have to press a click of a button. All of these things make it easier to spend your money and not think about how you're spending your money. So taking a step back at that and really being present in the moment every time you swipe your card has really been a game changer for me and made me a little bit more aware of how I'm spending my money so that I can spend it a little bit more wisely for the future. Then the last book that I read in January is Never Let Me Go. This was actually my book club book for the month, and this was our worst book club book. I'm not going to lie to you. I cannot believe how much just happened in this section. This book was literally a dead fish for the majority of it, and all of a sudden, this last section had so much, like, I don't even know where to start. First of all, the concept of the book is very good. Looking back at it, I feel like it could have been done very, very well. It could have been a thrilling experience, but the way that it was done, the way that it was executed, I'm not gonna lie, it's a very boring book. I did not enjoy it. I felt like we were just following a bunch of 13-year-old kids who had very terrible personalities. I didn't really like any of them, even though they required our sympathy. I didn't feel very sympathetic or connected to them in much of a way because I didn't like how they were, and I didn't feel like we knew much about them. There wasn't enough pull to pay attention to the plot enough to care about these characters, in my opinion, and my book club also felt that way as well. Also, if you want to join book club, the link is in the description box, but we are reading a better book this month. Anyway, I just felt like there wasn't much pull for me to really care about them, and unfortunately that took away from what the story could have been, because I felt like the idea, the actual plot could have been so cool, but I don't know, just me personally, I didn't think that the execution was well. So I did end up giving it a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And those were the 6 books that I read for January. But going into February, I am not going to lie to you. This was like my lowest reading month that I've had in over a year. I've only read 3 books in the month of February, which is absolutely insane, bonkers, because I usually read about 5 to 6 books. So I don't know what happened this time. I will say though, one of the books was very long and I really enjoyed the world, so I didn't want to leave it. So I do feel like that's one of the reasons why. But other than that, I don't know what happened. I do feel like I was in a bit of a reading slump starting the beginning of the month, just because again, I just came off of reading a lot of thought-provoking books and some very boring books. So I feel like that was why. So maybe I should give myself a little bit more leeway. But again, we only read 3 books in February, but they were really good ones. So the first one that I read was Thorn Hedge, and that was by T. Kingfisher. I really enjoyed that book. It was a very short book. It was a novella. It was less than 150 pages. T. Kingfisher does creepy crawly very, very well. Now, before we read What Moves the Dead by her, and I really enjoyed that. Now, this again was a retelling of another story. This was a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but a completely different way, which I really thought was cool. And I love this story because the writing in this, I will always love this woman because she is so cunning. You know what I like? This book made me really solidify something that I really enjoy in books. And it is the fact that I like dry, witty humor. I like when they say something matter-of-factly, but there's a wit to it and it's supposed to make you laugh. It's like supposed to make you chuckle in a way because it's written so smartly. And I like when books do humor in that way, when it's not like necessarily outright trying to be funny, but it's just very clever and it makes you like smirk to yourself. And she does that very well. I really enjoyed following this character, and this character is a toadling. So she was stolen as a child. As soon as she was born, she was stolen from the human world and was taken to the world of the Fae. And she was raised there for a bit until they needed something from her. They said, you know what, we need you to go back to the human world and watch after this child and make sure she does no harm to others. And so she goes back to the human world and she spends the rest of her life watching over this child, and she makes sure that no one gets to this child, right? And so you follow her kind of sad life. She doesn't do much. She doesn't interact with anyone because she's just standing on guard. She doesn't necessarily have like the highest self-confidence, and she doesn't think that she's much because she's never been told that she's much, and she has no family, so she's literally all by herself. And we know from the traditional story, a prince comes and tries to wake the Sleeping Beauty, right? But in this story, it's a little bit different because he does come and she interacts with him and tries to keep him away, and then you just follow that story. I'm not giving you any spoilers. That's what it says on the back of the book. book, but I loved her rendition and her take on a classic story because it was so creepy crawly. It was so different from how we traditionally know this story, and she was able to get straight to it in a very little bit of time and still make you feel something for those characters, which is very hard to do. Now, I will say, because the story is so short, you don't necessarily get a fully fleshed out cast, but I feel like the main players are good enough for you to really follow and to really care about. And that was personally good enough for me. And again, I just am a sucker for her writing. So she can write anything and I'm going to love it. It's not a life-changing book, and I did give it like a 3 or 3.5 stars, but it is a fun book. It's like worth the read. It's something, if you have a little bit of extra time one night, it's raining outside, you don't want to do anything, this is the perfect book to pick up. And again, I will read anything that she writes. Then after that, I finished the second book in the Six of Crows duology, Crooked Kingdom. I loved that book. I love that world. I love those characters. I love it. I love it all. I love it all. I will read anything that woman writes. You think I'll read anything that T. Kingfisher writes? I will read anything. What's her name? Wait, let me say her name right, because y'all ain't about to catch me slipping out here. Hold up. Google. I'm like one of those iPad parents. Hold on. Let me look this up. Lay? Is it Leia? Lay? Birdo?
Hi, I'm Leigh Bardugo, the author.
Leigh Bardugo. That's all I needed, mama. All right, Leigh Bardugo. I'm gonna read anything Leigh Bardugo writes. Yeah. Because after this, girl, I don't even know what to tell you. First of all, there are like 7 main characters. I don't know. I'm in my bag right now. I gotta keep taking off and on these glasses because y'all gotta hear me right now. There are like 7 main characters, and you know their full story. You know what they like, what they dislike. They're fully fleshed out. You know their pros, their cons, their fears, their anxieties. You know everything about these kids. And there's 7 of them. Have you ever heard of a book where there's that many main characters and they're fully fleshed out, fully 3D characters? Because I don't. That is insane. Oh my goodness. First of all, that in itself is an achievement, but we're not even talking about the plot. The plot is so complex. It's like an Ocean's 11 film, but set in a high fantasy world. It is just so amazing. The world building, the wit it had to take to write this story. It makes me have so much respect for her, because even me, where I'm like really trying to analyze, trying to figure out this book, there are so many plot twists that I just genuinely do not see coming. And she puts these plot twists into the story while making the writing so beautiful, so witty, so cunning. All of these characters are so smart and so different in their own way. And this follows a group of misfits who are just trying to achieve the impossible together. And though they're all so different, they create their own little family and they support each other. They're there for each other as they have this common goal of just freedom for themselves. Right? And it is such a tumultuous story, such a beautiful story. Each person has a chip on their shoulder for good reason, and you hear their backstory and you just can't help but fall in love with every single one of them, even though they're all so vastly different, even though there's no way you can possibly connect with every single thing about every single person. It's like you find your own group of misfits, your own group of friends, and you love them to the end because of it. And even at the end of this book, when I finished this book, I really genuinely felt a sadness in my chest, because I felt like I was saying goodbye to friends, and I just was in this world for so long. I was really trying to make it last for as long as possible, but of course naturally I finished it, and that was such a wonderful ride. I really love her writing so much. It's so beautiful. She's such a hard storyteller. She is going for the truth no matter what. She is going to flesh out the concepts of the story no matter what, and that was so impressive. Like, I was genuinely in awe of this character when I finished, and this was the first book I read by her. And if y'all remember, this was a series that I did not want to read because it was so popular, and usually with the popular book talk books I don't really have good luck, so I didn't think it was going to be much. But not only was it good, it was great, and it is now one of my favorite fantasy duologies. And now she's on my immediate buy list. Like, who could have saw that plot twist coming? Not me. Anyway, I'm in love with this woman. You need to read the series if you haven't already. I just cannot believe how amazing it was. And last but not least, I did read Red Rising with my book club for the month of February, and that was so fun. That is a crazy sci-fi world that I have never ever even read something close to that type of story. It was so cool, and it's the first book in a trilogy, so I am in for a wild ride. I already bought the other books because in the middle of this one I was like, yeah, we're gonna finish this series no matter what. It's just that good. Immediately when you jump into the story, you are a little bit confused and you're a little bit overwhelmed just because the world is so vastly different from the world that we live in. It is high fantasy to the highest degree. But once you get it and once you understand it, it is so worth the ride, so worth the story, because there are so many twists and turns, so many emotionally provoking scenes where you can't help but fall in love with the story. And this is one of those stories where you can't even tell someone that much about it without giving away information. So all I will say, it is about a man who will go to the ends of the earth for his wife and what he lost and for his people. That's literally all I can tell you, because if I say anything else, clues will be dropped, okay? And I'm not doing that. This story deserves its justice. All I will say is, if you like sci-fi, if you like high fantasy, pick this book up. You don't need anything else. You don't need anything else. It is that good. It is such a crazy ride. And the way this man writes love, the way that he writes his feelings and these high battle scenes, like the absolute brutality of the story is just unfathomable. Like genuinely, I'm like, God dang, like hits you in the heart. It is such a emotionally fueled book where you're immediately going to want to pick up the second one, just like me. So that's all I can really tell you about that book, but it was an immediate 6-star for me. I did give it 6 stars. It was so good. I am in for the ride and I cannot wait to get my heart broken. But those are all the books that I've read so far, and I'm very excited for the books that we picked for the month of March. If there are any books that you have any opinions on that I've already read, or any books that you think that I should read in the next few months, let me know in the comments below. But that's everything for me. I love y'all so much, and I'll see you very soon in the next video. Okay, bye.